Welcome back to Historical Context. Today we continue our discussion in the series entitled The Colonies During the English Civil War. Today's episode breaks away from some of the conversation we've been used to in Massachusetts, Virginia, Maryland, etc. Today we talk about New Albion, which many listeners may not be familiar with. Up to this point, we've talked about French, Spanish, Swedish, Dutch attempts to colonize the lower 48 states, but Ireland actually made an attempt during the 1640s. At the center of this story is a man by the name of Sir Edmund Plowden. His story starts in Ireland in 1632. According to researcher E.C. Carter, Plowden crossed paths with Lord Baltimore and his son Cecil. And if you're not familiar with the story on the founding of Maryland, we do have an episode about that you can go back and watch. But essentially, Lord Baltimore and his son Cecil are responsible for the founding of the Maryland colony, and Plowden crosses paths with them right at the time that they're planning this. While it's not sure if Lord Baltimore's aspirations rubbed off on Plowden, the fact that Plowden's charter request for a colony, which was approved in 1634, was in a different location than Maryland, was actually located in modern-day New Jersey, leads credence to the belief that the two may have shared their ideas. Plowden's leadership skills were questionable at best, and his personality also did not seem to be very charming. Between 1620 and 1659, that's a 39-year period, E.C. Carter found 119 instances of court actions against Sir Edmund Plowden. That would lead to approximately 3 per year. This guy got sued a lot. It also didn't include his time in Ireland because those records were destroyed in a fire. How would somebody with such a reputation be granted a charter? Carter surmises that Plowden paid for the charter because his wife was wealthy and he had access to her funds. Also, Charles I was short on cash in the 1630s. We've talked about this a little bit. And with Parliament not in session and the Dutch encroachment being seen as an increasing risk to New England, Charles I likely went along with this patent. In order to maximize on his profits, it would be best for the charter to be established under the Irish country. Because you got to remember, Charles I was also the King of Ireland during this time. The territory was to be set up similar in style to Maryland, and Plowden wanted 300 indentured servants sent over in order to get started. Very similar structure to Maryland. Once again, you got to wonder if Plowden and Baltimore exchanged ideas in the early 1630s. The charter would be granted within 1 month of the Maryland charter. Unlike the Calverts, Plowden would face delays converting his charter to an actual colony. First, he'd have to wait until 1634 to receive the charter because of administrative changes that were being made in Ireland. So go figure, bureaucracy in Ireland would slow down Sir Edmund Plowden. It would also take Plowden 8 more years to gather an expedition to form the colony, as the settlement itself wasn't even attempted until 1642. Plowden's attempt to colonize failed due to an attempted mutiny. And this goes back to earlier with all the court actions against him. It appears as if this guy had an act for rubbing people the wrong way. Plowden ended up in Virginia as a failed colony attempt, and he would continue his attempts to colonize New Albion while stationed in Virginia. He sold rights to adventurers and speculators, which led to encampments and trading posts being established in the area, but no actual towns. Very similar, New Jersey in the 1640s to New Hampshire in the late 1620s and early 1630s. You had people set up small things there so that they could survive off the land and trade, but you didn't have the infrastructure established or the manpower to build a town. Thus, most of these experiences weren't written. People didn't keep journals. They were more concerned with finding the means to get their next meal. The colony itself would have likely remained in relative obscurity, greatly unknown to anybody, had it not been for the writing of Beauchamp Plantagenet. Beauchamp Plantagenet. Plantagenet published a description of the province of New Albion in 1648. The publication started by indicating that the goal was to bring 3,000 people to the colony. Plantagenet was well traveled, having visited every major colony on the East Coast and several countries in Europe. He had obtained 10,000 acres from Plowden and was working to bring friends from Holland over to help build the colony. So he had 10,000 acres sitting there. Obviously, it was of economic interest to him to have that colony developed. Since the patent itself, the original patent, didn't survive, we do not know what exact area was designated New Albion, but we know it was around the area of modern-day New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Maryland. Plantagenet actually gives us a relatively close description. Let's have a look at his writing. Whereas that part of America, or North Virginia, lying about 39 degrees at Delaware Bay, called the province of New Albion, is situated in the best and same temper, and as Italy, being between too cold Germany and too hot Barbary. So this lying just midway between New England, 200 miles north, and Virginia, 150 miles south, where now are settled 8,000 English and 140 ships in trade. First off, we get a clue there in terms of the number of colonists that are believed to be in the New World at the time, 1648, 8,000 in number from Plantagenet. Based on that description, I actually went and took 39 degrees north and looked at it on a map, and that line runs just 1 mile north of Washington, D.C. and cuts right through the Chesapeake Bay. So it would lead us to believe that the colony was slated to be more in Delaware, actually, than in New Jersey. Plantagenet goes on to mention the value of the land being in trade, and the abundant food and wood sources being all around. He named 12 other people that could attest to his account of the countryside. One of these men, we know, William Claiborne, no stranger to the podcast. In the 5th chapter of his writing, Plantagenet goes into detail about what supplies are needed and their cost to make the trip over. Let's have a look. Linen cloths, shoes, hats costing £2. Passenger freight with half-ton provisions, £1 10 shillings. Armaments and gunpowder, 19 shillings. Tools and the iron/steel to make more, 10 shillings. 5-shilling share for guns and powder for the fort. Bed, sheets, and rug for 15 shillings. Total cost for the voyage, £10, 5 shillings. So that's an interesting detail. If you're a 1648 Englishman looking for somewhere new in the New World and want to go to New Albion, it's going to cost you between 10 and 11 pounds. And again, he lists what you would need to come over. Plantagenet goes on to suggest that workers would earn between 5 and 6 shillings per day in tobacco, flax, and rice. That would lead an average traveler to believe that they could earn their travel debt over back in just 40 days. So if you're a free man and you can afford to do that, it'll take 40 days to earn that back. Of course, you must raise a successful crop first, so that's going to take some time as well. And you also got to figure, you got to compare that to indentured servitude, which lasted between 4 and 7 years. Plantagenet goes on to say that shipbuilders are paid 6 shillings per day. Iron makers earn 5 shillings 10 pence per day if the price of iron is above 12 pounds per ton. These are likely numbers taken from established colonies versus New Albion itself because, again, there wasn't much there, not much going on at the time. And Plantagenet would have known these things, having been such a well-traveled individual, so I do believe his information is rather reliable, and it matches a few of the other observations in terms of pricing that I've seen in some other writings. He adds that the typical working man in England is bogged down by debts and lawsuits, while he could be working in the New World, earning a living and hunting for his own food. So that's an interesting sales aspect here. Up to this point, we've talked about some of the reasons people are coming over to the New World. If you're going to Maryland, for example, you're likely looking for some religious freedom aligned towards Catholicism. If you're heading to New England, you're looking for religious freedom aligned more towards Puritanism. But there are people in Virginia, as well as New England and Maryland, who don't necessarily subscribe to the religious side as much as they are the mercantile side to earn a living. And while Plantagenet mentions that here, he also mentions this idea in England of people being bogged down by debts and lawsuits. First, I've heard of this. So by moving to the New World, he argues, you could have more financial freedom. Plantagenet concludes his writing by offering any adventurer who brings 50 men at a cost of £500, 5,000 acres, and a manor. So you could have your own manor and 5,000 acres if you can bring 50 men over, and based on the cost we heard earlier, it costs £500 to do that. Each free man willing to travel would receive 100 acres of land. Any indentured servant would be freed after 5 years and receive 30 acres of land. That all concluded Plantagenet's writing, and honestly, not a lot is known about him after that, which isn't too much of a surprise because he was traveling all over the place, and of course in this writing he is trying to persuade people to come over. And the terms that he's offering are very similar to Maryland's terms, but unlike the Calverts, it doesn't seem Plowden has the type of leadership to get a colony started. A 1651 map of Virginia shows New Albion closer to modern-day Wilmington, Delaware, or Philadelphia. Again, we kind of talked about that before. Now that Wilmington, Philadelphia is up closer to New Jersey, so it's further to the north than the line that we drew earlier. But again, even in 1651, New Albion's still on the map, if you will, as a possible colony. But the failure would happen. New Albion never did come about. The colony failed to materialize, and the reasoning behind that depends on a number of things. But at this period of time, having the English, Swedes, and Dutch so close around you, it probably did not provide an attractive place to colonize. Go back to what we talked about earlier about why people were coming over. And think about an Englishman wanting to come over or looking at this wanting to come over. You're going to get a similar deal heading to Maryland right now. You're going to get infrastructure already in place when you arrive. You're going to be further away from the Dutch. You're not going to have to necessarily build, again, a town or a town of infrastructure. And furthermore, if you need even more development and want to be more involved in the mercantile side, Virginia would still probably be the place to go. In addition to this, anyone affected by the ills of the English Civil War would have been better off in Virginia than New Albion, mainly because of the sentiment of the colonial people there at the time. And future episodes around this time, late 1640s, early 1650s, will talk about that a little bit more. Sir Edmund Plowden would end up returning to England in 1649, having failed to colonize the area, and he died in 1659. New Albion ended up becoming more of a dream than a reality, but an attempt at an Irish colony makes this a very unique piece of history. Next week, we're going to go back to New Netherland, and we're going to look at how the colony, even though it was set up as a nice mercantile colony, nearly got destroyed in the 1640s. And we'll talk about that next time on Historical Context.